Olivia sat by the floor-to-ceiling windows of her Manhattan penthouse, staring blankly at the city lights below. The glass of wine in her hand hadn't been touched, its dark red swirl mirroring the mess of thoughts she couldn't put into words. Loneliness had settled in like an old habit, creeping into her bones. Narrator aside, funny how the fancier the apartment, the emptier it feels. Her husband, Daniel, was off on another business trip, because, of course, he was. The silence he left behind was deafening. She'd gotten used to his absence, but that didn't make it hurt less. Their marriage hadn't always been this way. In the beginning, Daniel had worshipped her, like she was the only thing that mattered. But over time, his ambition took over. Now, she was just background noise in his life. She used to think their love was unshakable. Now, she wasn't so sure. The passion had fizzled out, replaced by stiff small talk and half-hearted goodnights. Nights like this just rubbed salt in the wound. The sound of the front door clicking open snapped her out of it. She turned to see Ethan walking in, filling the room with that cocky, self-assured energy of his. Tall, sharp jawline, that infuriating smirk, nothing like Daniel. He had this way of making even the simplest moments feel loaded. "Rough night?" he asked, nodding at the full glass in her hand. Olivia forced a smile. "Something like that." Ethan flopped onto the couch across from her, sprawling out like he owned the place. "Dad called. Said he'll be gone another week." Narrator aside, big shocker there. Work always came first. "Of course he will," Olivia said, trying to sound indifferent. Ethan studied her, eyes narrowing. "You don't seem fine." She let out a dry laugh. "That obvious?" He shrugged. Olivia really looked at him then. He wasn't the same reckless college kid she remembered. Now, there was something calculated about him, a quiet danger in the way he watched her. She shifted in her seat, suddenly hyper-aware of how close he was. "It's nothing," she lied. "Just overthinking." Ethan didn't push, but his gaze didn't waver either. That was the unsettling part, how easily he saw right through her. Narrator aside, and here's where things start going off the rails. Over the next few days, Olivia caught herself noticing Ethan in ways she shouldn't. It wasn't intentional, just little things. Conversations that ran too long. Glances held a second too late. He had this way of making her feel seen, something Daniel hadn't done in years. She started dressing differently around him, not that she'd ever admit it. Tighter dresses, hair down instead of up. Harmless, right? Just a little ego boost. Except Ethan noticed. "That color looks good on you," he said one night, eyes dragging over her in a way that made her skin prickle. She laughed it off, pretending it didn't send a jolt through her. But it did. One evening, she baked, something she hadn't done in ages. The kitchen filled with the rich scent of chocolate cake, warm and comforting. Ethan wandered in, drawn by the smell. "You bake?" he asked, surprised. Olivia smirked, sliding a plate toward him. "Used to." He took a bite, his expression shifting. "Damn. That's really good." She watched him, something twisting low in her stomach at the way he savored it. A simple moment, but the way he looked at her, like she was something to be devoured, made her pulse spike. "I'm full of surprises," she said lightly. Ethan held her gaze, unreadable. "Yeah. I bet you are." The air between them thickened. Olivia forced herself to look away. Narrator aside, and that's when she knew she was in trouble. That night, Olivia lay in bed, restless. The house felt different, charged, like the calm before a storm. She told herself it was nothing, but the lie tasted bitter. Every interaction with Ethan crackled with something unspoken. She noticed everything now, the way his shirt clung to his shoulders, the low timbre of his voice when he spoke just to her. It wasn't just attention. It was hunger. She tried to avoid him, but the penthouse suddenly felt claustrophobic. Everywhere she turned, there he was, lounging on the couch, leaning in the doorway, watching her with those knowing eyes. Then came the breaking point. She was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables like her life depended on it, when she felt him behind her. Too close. "You're quiet today," Ethan murmured, his breath brushing her neck. Olivia gripped the knife tighter. "Just tired." He didn't move. "Is that all?" She turned, heart hammering. His gaze pinned her in place, dark, intent. "What else would it be?" she challenged. Ethan smirked, but there was no humor in it. "If you say so." He stepped back, but the damage was done. The tension between them was a live wire. Narrator aside, and that's when she realized, she wasn't just fighting him. She was fighting herself. The final night, everything unraveled. Olivia was on the couch, pretending to read, when Ethan sat down beside her. Too close. Always too close. Can't sleep? He asked. She shook her head. He leaned in, voice dropping. You don't have to pretend. Pretend what? That you don't feel it. Her breath caught. She should have walked away. Should have run. But she didn't. Ethan's gaze burned into her. I see the way you look at me. The way you try not to. Olivia swallowed hard. This is wrong. Is it? You're my stepson, she whispered. He tilted his head, studying her like she was a puzzle he'd already solved. She stood abruptly, putting space between them. This isn't happening. Ethan didn't move, didn't chase, just watched her with that infuriating calm. If you say so, he echoed. She walked away, heart pounding. But the truth was, the line had already been crossed. And Olivia? She couldn't think straight anymore. Every look between us was loaded, like a gun waiting to go off. I kept telling myself it was just tension, that if I backed off, it'd fizzle out. But we both knew that was bullshit. It was already too late. Narrator aside, funny how you don't realize you're drowning until your lungs are full of water. That night, a storm raged outside, and inside? Worse. Rain hammered the windows like it was trying to get in. The kitchen was freezing, but I was sweating, white-knuckling the counter like it could anchor me. I needed to get a grip. Needed to stop this before it burned my whole life down. Then, footsteps. I didn't even have to turn around to know it was him. You've been avoiding me, Ethan said from the doorway. I exhaled slow, still facing away. Yeah. For the best. Why? I finally turned. His eyes were dark, unreadable. You know why. He took a step closer. I don't think you want to stop. My chest tightened. You don't know what I want. That smirk of his, like he'd already won. Pretty sure I do. I should have walked out. Should have ended it right there. But I didn't. I let the silence stretch, let the moment coil between us like a snake about to strike. Then, it happened. One reckless choice. 1 second that smashed every boundary I'd pretended to care about. It was electric. It was poison. My brain screamed stop, but my body? Traitor. Every touch, every gasp, I knew I'd hate myself later. But in that moment, I didn't give a damn. Then, reality crashed back in. I shoved him off, breath ragged. The room felt like it was closing in. This is wrong, I choked out. Ethan just watched me, calm as hell. Was it? I stumbled back. It can't happen again. He didn't answer. Just leaned against the counter, studying me like I was some bug under glass. Then, his smirk turned icy. You actually thought this meant something. My stomach dropped. What? He shrugged. Knew it from the start. The way you looked at me? Couldn't hide it. I just wanted to see how far you'd go. Narrator aside, and just like that, the knife twist. The floor vanished under me. You were testing me? His silence said everything. Nausea rolled through me. I gripped the counter so hard my hands shook. This was a game to you? Ethan had the nerve to look pitying. You played along, Olivia. Don't act like you didn't want it. Shame hit me like a truck. I turned away, mind racing. How the hell had I been this stupid? Relax, he said, cool as ever. I won't tell. Like that mattered. The damage was done. Even if nobody ever found out, I'd know. I'd always know. I forced myself to look at him one last time. The boy I thought I knew. Gone. In his place, a stranger who'd seen me break. I walked out. Every step felt like dragging concrete. Left behind, the worst mistake of my life. The man I'd once trusted. Now just a ghost in my head, laughing at me. The mirror showed a stranger these days. Hollow eyes, cracked lips, like I'd been gutted. The woman I used to be. Dead and buried. I'd lied to myself for months. Called it a mistake. A lapse. But standing here now, I knew the truth. It wasn't one bad choice. It was 100 little ones, each one pushing me closer to the edge. Days blurred. Ethan avoided me, no more smirks, no lingering looks. Like I'd ceased to exist. Narrator aside, guess I wasn't fun to play with anymore. Daniel noticed, of course. He wasn't as clueless as I'd pretended. One night at dinner, he put his fork down slow. You've been different, he said, voice quiet. Did I do something? The question punched through me. I'd spent so long blaming him, his late nights, his distractions. But now, looking at him, really looking, I saw the truth. The distance between us. I'd built half of it myself. I couldn't pin this on him anymore. Not when the truth sat in my throat like a shard of glass. No, I whispered. It's not you. Daniel nodded slowly, but the doubt in his eyes? Unmistakable. Like a man standing at the edge of a cliff, sensing the drop before he sees it. He knew. Maybe not the details, but the rot between us? Yeah. That was obvious. Narrator aside, funny how the lies you tell loudest are the ones you're screaming at yourself. The tension had been brewing for weeks, thick, suffocating. And I knew, no matter how hard I prayed otherwise, the truth was coming. Like a train with no brakes. Then I heard Ethan the night before. His voice low, deliberate, making plans to leave. He's going. The words sank into my ribs like a knife. I thought I'd feel relief. Instead, just dread. The kind that sits in your gut when you realize you torched your own life and now you've got to stand in the ashes. The night before he left, I found him on the balcony, staring at the city like it owed him something. The air between us was stale, charged with all the shit we weren't saying. I hovered in the doorway, torn between walking away and the sick, desperate need to fix this, even though I knew damn well nothing could be fixed. You're leaving. My voice barely made it past my lips. Ethan didn't turn. Yeah. Time to go. His tone was flat, final. Like I was already a ghost. My stomach twisted. I never meant to. Don't. He cut me off, sharp. We both know what this was. The shame hit me like a punch. I squeezed my eyes shut. Narrator aside, that's the thing about bad decisions. They don't hurt when you're making them. The pain comes after. I'd lied to myself for months. Told myself we could go back. Pretended this was just a detour, not a dead end. I don't know how to fix this, I admitted, voice cracking. Ethan finally looked at me. His eyes? Empty. Like he'd already checked out. You don't, he said softly. There's nothing to fix. The words gutted me. I opened my mouth, to beg, to explain, to something, but what was left to say? I wish I could take it back, I choked out. Ethan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. That's the problem, Olivia. You can't. Then he stood, grabbed his drink, and walked right past me. Goodbye, he muttered, voice hollow. And just like that, he was gone. I stood there, staring at the empty space where he'd been. The air felt thick, like the whole city was holding its breath. Narrator aside, and just like that, I was alone with the mess I'd made. A week later, Daniel cornered me. He hadn't heard it from Ethan. No, he wasn't stupid. He'd seen it in the way I flinched when he touched me. The way my eyes darted away like a guilty dog. Is there something you need to tell me? He asked, voice terrifyingly calm. The room shrunk. My lungs burned. I could have lied. I could have lied. I could have spun some half-assed story, slapped on a smile, and pretended I was still the woman Daniel married. But the truth was a rotten thing sitting between us, and I was too goddamn tired to play pretend anymore. Yeah, I whispered. The word tasted like ash. The silence after was worse than screaming. Daniel didn't yell. Didn't even look angry. Just, disappointed. That slow, crushing disappointment that makes you wish he'd just throw a damn plate instead. I don't even know who you are, he said, voice frayed at the edges. And hell, he was right. I didn't know me anymore either. Not after what I'd done. Not after what I'd let myself become. The divorce papers came a month later. I didn't fight them. What was the point? I'd already lost him. Truth was, I'd lost myself long before that, piece by piece, bad decision by bad decision. Packing up the house felt like digging my own grave. Every photo, every stupid throw pillow we'd argued over at Target, all of it just proof of how far I'd fallen. Narrator aside, funny how you don't notice the line until you've already crossed it. How many warnings had I ignored? How many times had I told myself it was just a phase, just a moment, like self-destruction was some cute little detour. I'd thought temptation was a storm I could outrun. Turns out, it was the flood that drowns you slow. There was no thrill looking back now. No heat, no passion, just the hollow ache of regret. Some betrayals fade. Others? They carve into you, leave scars that itch for the rest of your damn life. And some mistakes, no matter how small they seem when you're making them, cost everything. I shut the door behind me, the click of the lock final. The life I'd built with Daniel was gone. The safety, the certainty, the love, all of it traded for what? A few stolen moments with a man who never gave a shit about me? A pathetic attempt to feel something, anything, besides invisible in my own marriage? Pathetic. Narrator's final reflection, AI voice friendly. Life tests us all. Temptation whispers that the rules don't apply to us, that consequences are for other people. But the truth? Every choice matters. Every compromise chips away at who you are. Olivia's story isn't about passion. It's about cost. The husband she took for granted. The self-respect she gambled for a cheap thrill. The life she'll spend forever wishing she could undo. So here's the lesson, don't. Don't trade what's real for what's easy. Don't confuse wanting with deserving. And when that voice in your head says, it's just this once, remember Olivia. Remember the price.